Okay, good morning. We're going to start looking at Intacct reports today. We have the agenda of the reports we're going to go through. I'm going to take a look at life-to-date reports, fiscal year, monthly report, Intacct budget comparison. And then we're going to look at a general ledger report called Dimension Balance, the check register under accounts payable, and if we have enough time at the end, we'll look at purchasing transaction detail, which if you're researching your program's purchasing activity, this is a really good report for you to use. So we'll get started. Navigating to financial reports is going to be the same. Go to your application to reports, report center. Report center is the best spot to use in pretty much any of the reports that we have. It has a search bar and a couple other features that make it easier for you to find your reports. And actually, I'm just going to start using Intacct now. So go into there, into applications, reports, report center. When we get here at the top of our screen, we have some menu options to tell us what kind of reports to use. We have favorites, meaning if any of these reports you click the gold star, you've made it a favorite. And when you click on favorites, it'll list only those things that you've clicked the gold star for. So if you're using favorites and we're looking for a report that we haven't favorited, keep that in mind. It might not be listed here. You'd have to go back out to all reports. On occasion, someone will call and ask why they can't find a certain report. And sometimes it's these little options up here that we're dug into and then we're not finding anything. So typically you're on favorites or all reports. All reports is the best option because that means you can find any of the reports that you're looking for. You also have the option to choose the type of menu for the reports, where it's the financial reports, purchasing, accounts payable, accounts receivable, general ledger, and this depends on your access for some of the other menu options. Usually, again, the best thing, stay on all applications. As long as you're on all reports and all applications, you shouldn't have an issue finding a report that's available to you. If we're on favorites or we're on one of these menus, we're really limiting the type of reports that we can access. So we're going to start with the life-to-date report. And something I want to talk about is the search bar. I don't know if anyone's been making a point to use the search bar here. But when you're looking for a report, you don't have to scroll through anymore to find what you're looking for. As you type options up here in the search bar, Intacct will match what you're typing. No matter where what word you're typing, no matter where it is in the title of the report, it's going to come up. So if I started typing life, it's going to start showing me the options that have the word life in it. So under the financial report section, we have a handful here that we can choose from that have the word life. And so we're going to look at a life-to-date report. The life-to-date report is the report that provides financial and budgetary data for the life of a funding source or funding sources you're running a report for. That means the budget is going to be for the life of what we're looking at, and so will the expenses. If you have multiple years of budget, you have a budget in fiscal year 21 and 20 and 19, and you run a life-to-date report, it will combine all of those budgets together for one budget view. The expenditures will be the same way. Every fiscal year you've had activity for the funds you're looking up, all of that stuff will be combined. For the life-to-date reports, for the most part, the types of programs that are using this are those that have grants that span multiple years. Things like the 638 contracts, IHS. Other programs that might do it might have single year grants that run outside of the tribe's fiscal year. So all of our reports in Intacct are geared on the tribe's fiscal year, October through September. But if you're a program like Head Start or diabetes, your fiscal years are going to run different from that. So a life-to-date report would be able to grab your budget and then all your expenses that might straddle 2 different fiscal years. And so I want to look at the life-to-date expenses, shows all funding sources. When we see the list, one will have one funding source and the other will have shows all funding sources. And what that means is if I only want to see one funding source, I'm going to run this report. If we have funding sources that are all under a parent funding source, meaning there's one top one and a bunch of others assigned to it, if I choose one funding source and choose that top fund, it will combine all of those funding sources into one report, which might be fine if you're looking for the overall expenditures of a grant or a contract. But if you're looking for information specific to a funding source, you'd want to identify that one, or you show all funding sources if you want to see all of them. And that's what I'm going to do here, is we're going to look at life-to-date expenses, shows all funding sources. And I get emails on it occasionally. So we have, now that we've been using Intacct since FY17, so we're on our fifth fiscal year of using this, life-to-date reports can start to time out because they're so large, and the way it's built and the way Intacct runs the reports, you might have it time out while you're waiting for it to run. So if you're going to run a life-to-date report, your best option is to run it through a thing called Process and Store. So instead of clicking on the report name, down at the end we have an option that says More Actions. So when I click that, we have Process and Store. And so what this is going to allow us to do is have the report run, but it's going to run on Intacct servers and not on our computer. So it's not going to time out after it takes too long. So we've got, we can actually schedule the report also. So I want to run the report today, so it defaults to today. But if you wanted to schedule this and say, you know what, on Monday when I come back into work, I want a report to be ready for me, you can choose Monday as a day. But for today, we're going to run it today. You'd want to tell Intacct which checkbook you're using. You definitely need to tell it the program you're running a report for. And now I've chosen the shows all funding sources option. So if I leave funding source blank, what will happen is the report that gets returned to us will include every funding source that has activity that's been assigned to the test company and to checkbook 35. So it's probably perfect for what I'm looking for. We could choose a vendor if we wanted just specific vendor information. And so we have the report scheduled to run today. When do we want the report to be run as of for the financial information? When's the cutoff date for financial data that we want? So this date will tell you, basically controls what we're going to see. I'm going to leave it today because I want it for the life of these funding sources, all the financial data that runs through today. So I've got March 19th selected. The other option we want is, now we have to tell it, where do we want this report delivered to? Are we going to deliver it to Intacct, to the cloud? Right now we don't have anything set up for a cloud option, so we're always going to pick Store in Intacct. And then which format do we want to see? HTML, which is the format we see when we run a report inside Intacct. Do we want it as a PDF so we could choose printable? CSV or Excel if there's other changes we're going to make once we get the report. Maybe we're going to create pivot tables or change the font, or use that for some other type of spreadsheet. You could use it, select CSV or Excel. So we're going to choose printable. And I think I picked the wrong report on the other side. I want to make sure we're on the right one. And so now that we have our program, our checkbook, our scheduled day, when we want the data to run, and what format we want, we can click OK. Get a message that the report is being processed. Check My Stored Reports for the report results. Depending on the size of the report, this report may take a few minutes, or it might take 10 to 15 minutes for you to get your report returned. But the important thing is this thing is running offline, so now you can go about your business in Intacct, and Intacct will notify you when the report is ready. If you don't have the option, or you don't know that if the option is set, you can go into your user preferences, which click on your name and choose My Preferences. Under email notifications, there's an option to check mark stored reports are generated and available. Make sure, if this is the type of report you want to run, that you have stored reports selected, so that when it's ready, you'll get an email that the report is there, and now you know that it's available to go see. So just make sure you check that and then save that option before you run the report. So this report's now running offline. We see it on the report center. There's a link called View Stored Reports. So if I go there now, it says it's in process, so it's not completed yet. So our option's either to keep coming back to this page or just go about our day until we get an email. So I haven't gotten an email yet, so we're going to move to the next report, and then we'll circle back to this report. The next report we're going to look at is the fiscal year report. Still using the search bar. And we get the same options basically as a life-to-date report. Do we want to see one fund? Do we want to see all funds separated from each other? Expenses, revenues, or revenue and expenses? Your choice on what information you want to see. So I'm going to choose a one funding source view report because I'm going to tell Intacct I want to see one specific funding source. When do I want to see the information as of? If I use today's date, that means it's going to run the report based on the tribe's fiscal year through March 19th. If I wanted it for the tribe's fiscal year 2020, I can change the date to 9/30/20 and then fill in the rest of the information, and that's when the report will run for. I'm going to leave it for today. Got our test program, our checkbook. Pretty much all the program users, a program and a checkbook's the minimum required amount of information you need to have in there for a report to run. Funding source is optional. So if you don't put that in and we're running a one funding source view report and you have more than one fund, just be aware that that could create a small complication or a confusion if it's combining reports and you're not sure how much money to spend. So when we're running a one funding source view report, unless you have one fund, you need to specify the funding source. So for my test ones, I have several. So we're going to choose one of those. And now we can let the report run. And so for the fiscal year reports, this is based on the tribe's fiscal year, October through September, and no other period of time. Intacct, we can only set one fiscal year, so we've set it to the primary fiscal year of the Rosebud Sioux tribe. If you operate outside of that fiscal year and you run this report, you run the possibility of not including all of your expenses, all of your encumbrances, or even your budget, because this will only provide financial and budgetary data for the specific fiscal year of the tribe, based on that as of date. And so we can see we run that, we get our budget column, we get our encumbrance column, what we spent for the month based on that as of date. So we use today, so it'd be the month of March. And then what's been spent for the fiscal year for the funding source. It's a test fund, so great, there's been nothing spent, there shouldn't be. Intacct has added some options for us when we run a report this way. If you haven't seen that yet, if you use the little settings wheel, you can change the size of the report. So if it makes it easier for you to see, you can make it larger or smaller depending on how much room that you need to make for what you have on your screen. If we have a lot of information and our screen is smaller, we can lock or unfreeze this first column. So when we see this line, that means this very first column with the account numbers are locked. So if we had to scroll farther to the right and the screen scrolls, we would still get this to stay on task, so we can still understand what line item we're looking at. So for the fiscal year reports, typically it's the general funded programs, indirect cost funded programs, casino funded programs, revenue funded, and programs that have single year grants that run concurrent with the tribe's fiscal year. All right, another report we're going to highlight is the monthly revenue and expense report. I'm not sure if anyone here has tried using that report. If I use the search bar, start typing monthly, we see all the reports that have the word monthly in them. And what I'm looking at here is the monthly report, revenue and expense, one funding source view. So if we run the report with our program, our checkbook, and our funding source, we'll get a result here momentarily. So this report is designed to show us encumbrances and actual by month. Those amounts are going to be combined into one stat instead of like on the other financial reports. We have one column for encumbrance and another for the actual expenses. This is going to combine them. So what we see is we're running it for this year through today. So we have a column for October, November, December, January, February, March. Right underneath that in smaller font, actual plus encumbrance. So if we see this, it's great for getting our total obligations out there. We understand what we're spending on a monthly basis. We can use this to look at historical data if we want to try and project where we're going to be spending for the year. If we're doing monthly reports for our grants and our other awards, this is another good report to use for that purpose. And we also get the fiscal year budget. And at the end, the total actual spending and encumbrances combined for the whole year so far. And that's controlled by the as of date. So if I ran that as of 2/28, we would have no March information. It would just be through February 28th. Or if we wanted fiscal year 20, we change that as of date to 9/30/20, and we get the 12 months of that fiscal year. And again, it's based on the tribe's fiscal year. If you have questions as I go, please use the chat box in the bottom right. Okay. So the next report I want to look at is the Intacct Budget Comparison Report. So it's good to know we use the search bar. Only one report has the word Intacct in the title. So it's Intacct Budget Comparison. So if we want to run this report, but we want to take it to a PDF immediately so we don't have to make it run twice, I'm going to choose PDF under the Export As option. This is designed again to run by the tribe's fiscal years. So what date do we want to cut off the report for? Our program and checkbook, and a funding source. Once we have that stuff input, we click OK. And what we now see is a side-by-side comparison year over year of just the budget only for the funding source I ran the report for. So if we were looking at our historical trends and how we've been doing on spending, anything that's changed greatly from all these fiscal years this funding source has been used in Intacct, you can see that, just as you're seeing, it's a pretty fast report to do that with. And you can get a handle of what anything that might stand out, or soon we'll be planning our fiscal year 22 budgets. So this might give us a better look at how we've done year over year and where we might go for the next year budget. And again, this one only gives us budget, so there's no expenses. This isn't what's available to spend. It's just what the budget sits at currently. So FY 20, 19, and 18 that this funding source has been used. And then by exporting it to PDF, it saves you the step of clicking on the report name, running it inside of Intacct as an HTML, and then saying you want to print it, and then it prints to this, basically making you run it twice. So use the PDF option when you can. We can also export them to Excel. So we have a question that says, is this where we could see funds for a possible carryover? No, the budget comparison report will only give us what's budgeted. It'll have nothing to do with what we've spent or haven't spent. It'll just give you a budget. If you're looking for carryover, you're looking at one of those first two reports, which is your fiscal year report, if it's a single year grant, or life to date report. So here's the Excel report that's come out from what I exported. So now we can do whatever we wanted to do with this information. We want to start highlighting the biggest number or whatever it is that we want to do. And you want to make the highest number green. And there we go, and then we can print that out. So got some good options for reports. We have another question about, is there a report from month to month expense comparison? That's the report we just looked at, the monthly report, revenue and expense. So if we run the same report we did here, when the information comes up, we'll see a month-by-month run of expenses. So we can see travel, for example, 0 in October, 0 in November, 0 in December, 0 in January, and then we have some travel costs in February, and nothing so far again in March. So you can use this to get your monthly cost from month to month. If you're looking at this and we're looking at like our employee wages, those types of costs, don't get too excited if the number fluctuates from month to month. That can be affected for the 2 months a year that we have 3 paydays. So keep that in mind, that the day of payday might affect that fluctuation. All right. Next report I want to look at is the General Ledger Dimension Balance Report. For me, I think this could be one of the better reports Intacct has for research. So if I'm getting questions from typically other monitors about why certain activity has occurred or where the balances are from, that kind of stuff, a Dimension Balance Report really lets you dig into some of the information. So we're going to General Ledger, and under Reports, there's Dimension Balances. And like most of the reports that we're looking at, we need to tell it what period of time we want to run this report for. So the default on this is, do we want to run it for the current month as of March 19th, today's date? We can choose to pick a different period of time. If I wanted to select just December, I could change this day to December 31st. So then the report would know the current month as of December 31st, in other words, the month of December. Or we can just type in a time frame right here to override whatever's been selected here. So if we have anything here, it overrides the reporting period and as of date. So I've got February 1st through today. Now we want to start telling it the type of information we want to get from it. It defaults to the accrual book, meaning our actual expenditures that have been posted. So if we're looking up expenses, perfect. If we want to look at our encumbrances, we can go to the right beneath that where it says other books, select, and slide encumbrances to the selected items column. If we do that, we see a little thing here that says it's combining that reporting book, meaning the accrual book, and our encumbrances book. Typically, I never combine those things. It can create a lot more confusion doing that. Either look at your expenses or look at the encumbrances when doing this report. So I'm going to uncheck that. We're going to look at just encumbrances. Now we need to tell it which account numbers do we want to look at. We can specify a range. We can choose multiple accounts. So if we didn't want to choose a range of things because other accounts might get included. For example, if up here I wanted to look at travel through utilities. If I run a report with that, it's going to deliver to me every single account number that has activity. And I might not want that. I might just be looking for something specific. So account from might not be a good option. We may choose multiple accounts and then say, you know what, I want travel and I want utilities. So now it's just those two account numbers that I'm gonna get information for. So pretty much it's up to you on how you want to choose what information you want to see from Intacct. And then you can always just choose all accounts. You don't have to choose anything. You just get everything that has activity. For today, I'm doing travel because Looks like we probably have some travel for people this weekend. So we've got encumbrances. We're going to look at just travel 60100. We don't need to worry about any of these questions about statistical accounts. We don't use them, so we'll ignore that part. Which program do we want to see? We're going to do all programs. If you have access to just one program, then you would just pick your program. All checkbooks. If you have more than one checkbook, you're welcome to pick all checkbooks if you want to get information from more than one checkbook. So if we have all programs and all checkbooks, it's likely then for funding source, we're going to leave blank because we're looking for everything that's coming through. If we want it only related to a specific customer, if there's customers you're using, most of the programs aren't, so that's probably not a field you'd worry about. Or if we wanted it for a certain vendor or a certain employee, we can start filling that in here. Certain item, we're running travel. So if I only wanted to see mileage and none of the other costs related to the travel, then I could pick just mileage. And for item, we can only choose the one item, so I'm gonna leave this one blank. Class, for the last year we've been picking regular or COVID. Some programs use some other options, but we can choose those as well, or leave blank if we want any class to be available to us. And the next part is what becomes tricky in building the report for this one. It's the show dimension values. So if we haven't run the report before, it's going to look like this. It's going to say select. It remembers the last stuff you selected, so for me, add checkbook up there. When we go here, we got a list of the dimensions available, what we want to see returned to us based on that stuff we put up top. So we might want to see by checkbook and item ID and name. And what that means, it's going to order the report by checkbook, and then underneath the checkbook, it's going to show us the item ID for this travel expenses. So we can select that stuff. We have some presentation selections we can make, which is cascaded or side by side. We'll run it both ways so we can see what it looks like. Add subtotals, which subtotals by each break in the report, and then of course adding a grand total for the whole thing. Page orientation for printing. If it's a lot of information, we want it landscape if it's too wide. Or if we want it portraits, when we print, we can get more lines on a page. That's up to you to choose. And do we want to fit it to one page? And then down here, we can choose custom titles for our report, which might be something that's valuable if we're printing this to show to our committee, the program director, or someone else besides you, to help other readers know what report you're looking at or what you've done here. So to recap, we're looking at this information from February 1st to March 19th. We've selected the encumbrance book, account number 60100, all programs, all checkbooks, and in this particular report, we want it grouped by checkbook ID and then by item ID. And we'll find out if we get any information in return. So let's click view. No data. I think might be travel advances. Oh, still nothing for travel. All right, let's try a different account number then. Utilities. And we better push that day back to 1/1. So now we get a breakdown of checkbook 1. Here's the account number they're using. Checkbook 2 and all the way down. And you can do that with any of the things. You want it sorted by program, by your funding source. So this is our cascaded view. This is what the side-by-side view would look like. A lot easier to read if you use side-by-side for this particular report. So now we can see it's an order by checkbook. There's the one account number that we've picked, and here's the amount of encumbrances, encumbrance activity that's occurred from January through now. And we can slice that information pretty much on any way that we want to. So if we wanted it different than by checkbook, if we wanted it by vendor, say, and then checkbook. So now using our utilities account, we know who's using coal pest control, who has encumbrances for Antelope Community, and all the other vendors being used for utilities, and then organized by checkbook. So if you had your funding source, that you might select funding source. And so you could have vendor and then fund instead of checkbook. Or maybe you funding source first, then your vendor. And a lot of this is basically for you to make that determination on how you want that information to be ordered or seen. And when we build this report through this little box here, we have a lot of options. Employee IDs, items, class, basically all the same stuff from the dimension filters that we get to choose from. Our accounts, programs, funding source, customers, vendors. So that the combinations are pretty big here in the information you can see. And obviously gives you a lot more flexible information than a financial report. Financial reports can be organized the way it is, and that's it. This will let us go into a bigger dive into some of the data. And the only limitation on this report is it doesn't show budget. So you would get either your encumbrances if you ran it that way, or you're going to get your expenses if you only wanted to see the expenses for the combination of stuff. All right. Any questions about this particular report, or is there a different format you'd want to see before I move on to the next one? Okay, so our next report is going to be the check register report. So occasionally someone will want to know what actual check numbers were used to pay our vendors, or if an old payment had cleared the bank, that kind of stuff. So if we go to accounts payable, under reports we have registers and then check register. So this will look very similar to dimension balances. What period of time are we looking at? When did all our reimbursement checks get written to us? When did all the vendors get paid? That kind of stuff. You get to choose all of that. So I'm going to use current month, but this time I'm going to change the as of date to 12/31. So in other words, for this check register, this is going to be for the month of December. So I can leave start date and end date blank because I'm going to use this combination. Checking account, just leave this part blank. Are we looking for a certain vendor? So let's look up a specific vendor. We'll look at Cherry Todd. And you can do a range of vendors too if you wanted to use a range of vendors instead of just one. Or leave blank if you want all your vendors to show up on the report. So I've got Cherry Todd selected. It's going to be all checkbooks, all programs for the report I'm going to run. You might have just your checkbook, just your program selected, which is just fine. Or you can select all your checkbooks if you have more than one. This particular report, we don't have the option to choose a specific funding source. So whatever funding source fits under this combination, it's all that information is going to come out. If we know check numbers, we can totally put in a specific check number if we want. And then do we want to see the details, meaning like the item ID and some more stuff that's within the purchasing transaction? Or do we want to leave it a certain way? Even if we show details, we can even choose a general ledger account. So if we were going to look for all of our vendors, but the only time we used office supplies or something like that, then we can click show details and then punch in there. We want to see any time we've spent money for office supplies that month. I'm going to leave show details off for this one. Do we want to see only voided checks? Only check transactions? So for a handful of our vendors and checkbooks, we also pay by ACH or electronic transfer. So if we don't want to include those in there, then we can just check mark to say we only want to see checks. Reconciliation status, do we want to see that? So I've got that check marked. And the reconciliation state, all of them in transit or cleared. In transit would be payments that haven't cleared our bank reconciliation, meaning or haven't cleared the bank. Or do I only want to see payments that have cleared? This report can get large, or wide. So you can choose portrait or landscape based on how much data is there if you're printing this. Do we want to sort this by date, check, vendor, amount, or bill account? So I've got vendor selected for this one. And I'm grouping it by vendor. And you can give it a custom title for the report too. So I've got that picked. Now we click view to run the report. And here's our list of checks for the month of December to Cherry Todd. So we get the date that the check was written, the bank account it was drawn on, the document number, meaning the check number, if it's a 5-digit number. If it's a really long number like this, that's an electronic transfer. The amount of that check or payment, and the month it was cleared through bank reconciliation. So we can see this first check was written on December 31st. It cleared our bank reconciliation in January. The date that's here isn't the date it cleared the bank, but instead once we get the bank statement and our accountant goes through the statement to compare it to checks, that's just, she cleared it for the month of January. So if we needed a specific clear date, we would have to contact her, but we can look at this and see if there's any payments that are outstanding. So if we had a vendor who said 2 months ago, you've paid me and I've never gotten paid, you could come here and see pretty quickly if the check has been cashed. Bank recs run about a month and a half behind because, like once the month is over, then the bank sends us a statement. So the first couple of weeks of each month, Lori is going through bank statements and reconciling those to verify activity. So for pretty much anything, say 2 months or older, you can look at this and see if it's cleared the bank. Otherwise, you might need to work with Lordy. So you get that information by running this report, and details is not on. Do we have any questions for the check register? Now, looking down, I forgot to come back to the one report I ran at the beginning of this. So here's the email I received from Intacct. Dear Intacct user, the report that you ran, life to date expenses, show all funding sources, has completed processing successfully. You may now access the report through My Stored Reports located in your reports menu. Regards, Intacct team. Let me get this out of the way. So if we go to the report center, at the top of each section is View Stored Reports. So I'm going to click View Stored Reports. Here's that report. It no longer says in process, it says PDF. So when I click that, now here's the life to date all funding sources report that ran while we were doing this session here. And Intacct was running it on their servers rather than my computer. So I was free to work, and then they emailed me when it was ready. So if you're running life to date reports, this is a great option for you to use and not tie up your computer or get frustrated if you get an error and then try running again and waiting another 15-20 minutes or however long it would take to run your report. And so for this one, I have two funding sources that had budget activity. So I've got one called Test for Community Services. Here's the budgets I had created for running a test stuff for them. And then here's a Test for Training, one that I typically use whenever I do trainings. No spending in the life of this, the existence of these two funding sources, so that's good. And we know that the budgets total 50, 50, and 50 for one funding source, and then here's the others for the other. And so if you run that for any of your funds, it's going to look for the entire existence that funding source has been in Intacct and return to you its budget, its encumbrances, the expenditures for the month, which would be based on that as of date, the expenditures for the fiscal year, which would still be queued on the as of date. So because I had it here, if there were expenditures, we know that would have been fiscal year 21, since that date is March 19th of 21. If I ran it as of September 30th of 2020, then the expenditures for the fiscal year would be fiscal year 2020. And then the month would be September. The expenditures for the life of that report, and then the available balance based on the budget minus the life to date minus the encumbrances. So that's that process and store part. Okay, so we've got a few more minutes. We'll look at the purchasing transaction detail report. So you can get there. If you haven't run it before, you'd want to go to the report center. We'll use our search bar. And as we're typing, it starts narrowing down what we're typing to match the report names with what we have. And so we have a few reports. The one we're looking for is called Purchasing Transaction Detail. We'll go ahead and open that up. And just like some of the others that we've looked at today, what period of time do we want to see? So it defaults to the current fiscal year through today. So you can change that period or change the as of date or customize your own start and end date. We're going to leave it on the current setting, so for the fiscal year. Is there a certain checkbook we're looking up? We'll do all. All programs, all checkbooks. If there's a certain item ID that we're looking at that we spent, then we can put that here, office supplies or mileage, whatever it is. That's your option to put there. I'm not going to select one because I want it to return a result for any item, not just a specific one. If there's one funding source we were looking at, we can put that here, or we leave it blank for all funding sources that would match the combination of the program and checkbook. State. So if you've gone to any of the last 2 purchasing trainings I've done in January and February, those trainings went over what the states meant. So we can use some of that information, or if we know what state we're looking for, we're going to do that. So we're going to look for open purchase orders. So there's going to be 2 specific states we're looking for to know that a purchasing order is open and still available to be used. So we're going to look at pending purchase orders, meaning one we've never converted to a voucher or to a justification, and partially converted ones, blanket purchase orders basically. Stuff that we've maybe converted once before, but there's still a balance on the purchase order that needs to be used, or we need to find something, we need to find it so we can close it. So I've got those 2 items selected. We can choose the purchase transaction type. We can only choose one. So either choose the one or leave it blank for all of those. We're going to choose purchasing order. And then we can choose a specific vendor or leave it blank for all vendors. So let's look at, I think I saw coal pest control on that one, so let's use coal pest control. And then we can choose the orientation, portrait, landscape. Do we want to give it a title different than the default one? Go for it. So once we have that in there, do we want to view the report? Do we want to print it right to PDF? And your other options would be, do we want to export it to any of these things? So up to you on how you want to see that report. Let's just view it inside of Intacct. Okay, so we get a return of anything that fits pending or partially converted, the date the purchase order is dated for. There's no GL posting date on a purchase order since it doesn't affect the general ledger, so that field will always be blank. Depending on your access, you might see more than one program here. So like I see Ken is here, so if he's looking at a report for more than one program, you'd get all of those listed in this one. The funding source or funding sources that fit your request. So as we scroll through, we can see there's multiple funding sources on this report. Which checkbook was being used. The link to the actual purchase order if we need to go take a look at it. Here's that state, so we can see pending, and then there's partially converted, so just one of them has been used before. The total of the purchase order. The line item that was used. Here's the vendor, coal pest control. Which purchase requisition it linked to create that purchase order. And then some other information from the purchasing transaction. So it's a great report. If you have encumbrances, we don't have to look around on a general ledger report or look at a financial report and not be certain of what could be creating this. You could come here to purchasing transaction detail, and it took, what, 2 minutes to put all this information and then run a report. And so you can find that stuff pretty quickly, pretty easily. And so, this purchasing transaction detail and dimension balances, like for me, researching and helping people with finding issues that they have or something they don't understand, these are the 2 most valuable reports. And you can make, just like the other stuff, you can choose any state or any other transaction type. So really up to you on wanting to do that. You know, with the only limitation being you can choose one purchase transaction type or all. So But once you start to figure out what these mean, the different states, then the transaction type doesn't really matter as much, because most of these states relate to a certain transaction type. Okay, any questions for purchasing transaction detail report? Okay. If we're not sure of what these states could mean, there's a couple resources you can use to find it. The first one is in Intacct. There's a help and support. If you haven't used it before, bring it up, go to the help center. Different information about Intacct, free training they offer. And up here there's even more information. So all the different stuff that we use. But if I come here and look up purchasing state, and now I have a list of the definition of what draft or in progress or pending, all the states that we can choose from in that report. That's all right there for us. So that's always one option to you. And the other one is go to ljstraining.info, and you can go to the purchasing tab under Intacct, and here's that standard purchase requisition workflow training I did in January. So the Google slides are there, the YouTube videos there. Here's blanket purchase order, same stuff. Those go through the states. And then there's just a video only on purchasing state definitions. So there's some stuff available there for you to see and use. So I either use Intacct's help guide or ljstraining.info and find a bunch of other information available to you. All right. So if we don't have any other questions, it's 11 o'clock, so we've been here for an hour. That was a lot of stuff to fly through for you guys. If you have any questions, always free to reach me by email. And as of yesterday, we're all back in the office.